One second he was driving beneath a wide and generous afternoon sky, the kind of sky that makes a man feel briefly that everything in his life is exactly as it should be, fingers tapping the steering wheel to an old song he half remembered from his younger years, thinking about nothing of consequence, thinking about the quiet weekend ahead and the book he had left open on the kitchen table, and the way the evening light would look on his front porch when he got home. He was not thinking about death. Most people never are in the seconds before it nearly finds them. The tire did not give warning. It simply surrendered all at once with a sound like a rifle shot, and the car became something ungovernable in an instant, a machine that had forgotten what it was made for. And Daniel's hands gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles went white, and he could feel the tendons in his forearms pulling taut as wire, and none of it mattered because the guardrail was already there, already filling the windshield, already inevitable. And then came the sound he would hear in dreams for years afterward, metal folding against metal with a violence that seemed almost personal, glass dissolving into light around him, and a pain that arrived not in pieces but all at once, total and absolute, like being swallowed by something ancient and indifferent. Then, darkness. Not the darkness of sleep or rest or the gentle fading of a tired evening. This was something older and deeper and without any promise attached to it. This was the darkness that does not ask whether you are ready. This was the kind a man enters alone and without any guarantee of return. Daniel Brooks was 53 years old, and he had spent those years being the kind of man that the world does not write songs about. He had taught shop class at Millhaven High School in Virginia for 26 years, teaching young people how to measure and cut and join and build, how to take raw and shapeless material and make it into something that could hold weight, something that could last. He lived alone in a small house on Crestwood Lane with a front porch he used every single evening regardless of season, sitting in the same wooden chair he had repaired himself 3 times over the years, watching the light leave the sky with the patient attention of a man who has learned that the small ceremonies of a quiet life are not consolation prizes, but the real thing. He had never been married, though there had been a woman once, years ago, and he still thought of her sometimes with a tenderness that had no bitterness in it anymore, only the soft ache of a road not taken. He had no children. He had good neighbors and 2 or 3 friendships that had survived decades, and a reputation in Millhaven as a man you could count on, a man who showed up when he said he would, a man who fixed things and helped and never made you feel the debt of it. He had never once in 53 years considered himself remarkable. He was just Daniel, steady, ordinary, unremarkable Daniel. The man who was there, the man who stayed, the man who never knew, not even for a single moment across all those quiet years, what that had meant to someone else. He woke to a white ceiling and pain so thorough it felt like weather. The beeping came first, then the awareness of the IV line, then the light through the window that was wrong somehow. Too pale, too institutional, not the light of his bedroom or his porch or anywhere he belonged. He moved his head and the pain moved with him, settling deeper. And then he became aware of someone standing at the edge of his vision. A woman, navy blue scrubs, dark hair pulled back from a face that was watching him with an expression he could not immediately organize into something he understood. There were tears in her eyes, not falling, held carefully in place. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a long time and has finally arrived at the moment they were waiting for, and now does not know quite what to do with it. Her face pulled at something in him the way a half-remembered song pulls. Not recognition exactly, but the shape of recognition, the outline of something that should be there and isn't quite yet. She stepped closer. "Do you remember me?" she asked. And her voice was soft and careful and full of things she was not yet saying. Daniel opened his mouth. His throat was dry as chalk. His thoughts moved through something thick and resistant. He looked at her face for a long moment, searching it the way you search a landscape in fog, knowing something is there, unable to find the edges of it. "Should I?" he finally whispered. And something crossed her face then, fast as a shadow, a pain so brief and quickly controlled that he might have imagined it before she arranged herself back into calm and said gently, "It's okay. You've been through something very serious. Just rest now." She adjusted his blanket with hands that knew exactly what they were doing and moved toward the door, and Daniel closed his eyes and the darkness came back. Softer this time, less like drowning, more like floating. Her name was Emma Hayes. He read it from the badge at her chest the next morning when she returned with his medication and a cup of weak hospital tea, prepared exactly the way he would have asked for it, without him having said a single word about his preferences. He noticed that. He noticed that she dimmed the overhead light when she entered without being asked, that she remembered which side he was more comfortable lying on, that when the physical therapist arrived and put him through the early exhausting work of reclaiming his own body, Emma found quiet reasons to remain nearby. Not hovering, not performing care, but simply present in the specific way that certain rare people are present, with a quality of attention that has weight to it, that you can feel without being able to explain. The other nurses were professional and kind. Emma was something different. Emma was invested in him in a way that ran beneath professional obligation, into something personal and old and unspoken. And Daniel felt the gravity of it, even through the medication and the pain, and the fog of a mind still reassembling itself from the inside out. "Have we met before?" he asked her one quiet afternoon when the corridor outside his room had gone still, and the light through the blinds lay in long, warm bars across the floor. Emma paused. Something moved behind her eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "When?" "A long time ago." "Where?" She looked at him steadily, with those eyes that held something he could not name. "You helped me once," she said. "When?" She shook her head, not dismissively, but gently, the way you redirect a child from a door they are not yet ready to open. "Someday, you'll remember," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." It was not the answer he wanted. It was not close to the answer he wanted, but something in the way she said it, with that particular quality of patient certainty, told him that she meant it in a way that went far beyond the professional, and he let it rest, and the afternoon settled back around them, quiet and unhurried, and full of things waiting to be said. He noticed the necklace on a Tuesday morning when the sun came through the window at an angle that caught it and made it gleam. It was small and silver and worn in the way that only decades of constant contact can accomplish, the surface smoothed by years of being touched, held, carried against skin through every season of a life. There was something about the sight of it that moved in him without attaching to anything yet, a feeling without a memory to hold it. When Emma saw him looking, she raised her hand and touched it, an unconscious gesture, the reflex of someone reaching for something that has always been exactly where they left it. "It was a gift," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her. "From who?" She met his eyes without flinching. "From you." The silence that followed was one of the strangest Daniel had ever sat inside. He felt the edges of it pressing against him. "What?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes filled then, not overflowing, just filling, the way a glass fills when you pour slowly and carefully. "You really don't remember," she said, and the way she said it broke something open in the room, some sealed thing, and the air felt different afterward, charged and tender and shot through with the particular grief of things almost lost. That night, Daniel lay awake long after the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythms, the soft roll of carts down corridors, the murmured consultations at the nurse's station, the distant machinery of a building that never fully sleeps. He stared at the ceiling and turned what he knew over and over in his mind. She knew him. She had kept something he gave her for years, worn it until it was smooth, worn it against her heart through whatever life had brought. She looked at him with an emotion that had decades behind it, and somewhere in the locked interior of his own memory, behind whatever doors the accident had sealed, something real and specific between them existed that she could reach and he could not. He lay there with that helplessness and let it be what it was. Sometimes the most honest thing a man can do is sit with what he does not know and trust that it will eventually come. The first memory returned without ceremony during a physical therapy session 3 weeks after admission. He was focused entirely on the grinding work of putting full weight on his injured leg, the therapist counting quietly beside him, when an image surfaced from somewhere below conscious thoughts with the abruptness of something that has been held underwater too long. A school hallway. Linoleum floors, scuffed pale at the center from years of foot traffic. The particular smell of a building crowded with young people, chalk and floor wax, and something indefinably adolescent. A girl on the floor with her books scattered around her, her face turned down, her shoulders pulled inward in the posture of someone trying to disappear, and other students moving past on both sides like water around a stone. Not stopping, not even slowing, their laughter pointed at something Daniel could not yet fully see. The image lasted only seconds before the pain in his leg pulled him back into the room. But it left something behind. Not quite a memory, the shape of one. The feeling of standing at the edge of something about to open. That evening, when Emma entered his room and the light from the hallway fell across her face at a certain angle, Daniel looked at her and for the first time saw beneath the woman in front of him to something younger and quieter and more fragile. He saw the eyes. They were the same eyes. He was certain of it in the way you are certain of things that exist below the level of argument. "I think I remember a school," he said. Emma went completely still. The room contracted around them. Neither of them breathed for a moment. Then tears moved slowly down her face. Not hurried, not dramatic, just a quiet overflow of something that had been held carefully for a very long time. "Take your time," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I've waited this long." He was 17, she was 14. That was the architecture of it, and the details filled in over the following days with the patience of something that had always been there waiting to be found. Emma had arrived in Millhaven that fall with her family, who had come with very little and no established footing in a small town that extended its welcome slowly to strangers. She was thin and quiet and wore clothes that other students noticed with the particular cruelty of adolescence, which finds vulnerability the way water finds the lowest point in any landscape and flows toward it without mercy or intention. She ate alone. She walked the hallways with her eyes down and her books held against her chest like a shield. She had perfected a kind of practiced smallness, the art of taking up as little space as possible in the hope that invisibility might eventually equal safety. Daniel remembered finding her one cold October afternoon sitting behind the gymnasium on concrete still damp from the morning's rain, her face in her hands, crying with the unguarded fullness of someone who believed with complete certainty that no one was watching. He had been heading somewhere. He could not now recover where. It did not matter. What mattered was that he stopped. He sat down beside her on the cold, wet concrete without announcement or ceremony, the way you sit beside someone you have known your whole life. And he unwrapped a sandwich from his lunch and set half of it beside her without saying anything about it. And he asked her what her name was. They had talked about small things, safe things, the kind of conversation that does not require courage from either party. And he had come back the next day, and the day after that. He had helped her with geometry, which she was failing not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of the mental stillness required to concentrate when your daily experience is one of sustained low-grade cruelty. He had walked beside her in the halls. He had not made speeches. He had not confronted anyone dramatically. He had simply and consistently refused to treat her as invisible. And because Daniel had a certain standing in the school's social landscape, because people noticed what he did and adjusted accordingly, the cruelty had faded, the way cruelty fades when it loses its audience. And before his family moved away the following spring, he had pressed a small silver necklace into her hand and told her, in the direct, unadorned way of a 17-year-old boy who means every word he is saying, that she was worth far more than the way the world had been treating her, and that she should not forget it, not ever, no matter what came next. When the final piece settled into place, Daniel sat in his hospital bed in the quiet of a late afternoon, and felt something move through him that had no clean name. Emma came in and saw it in his face immediately, the way you see dawn in the sky before the sun actually appears, the quality of the light changing first. "You remember," she said. He nodded. She pulled the chair close and sat beside him, and in the long amber light of that late afternoon, she told him the rest of the story, the part he had not been there for. The years after he left had been hard in ways she did not minimize or rush through in the telling. There had been real poverty. There had been years when the path forward was genuinely unclear, when the distance between where she was and where she might want to be felt less like a challenge and more like a verdict. There had been nights when she held the necklace in her palm in the dark of a room she shared with two younger siblings and closed her eyes and thought about a boy who had sat down beside her on cold concrete and shared his lunch and come back the next day and treated her like she was worth coming back for. She had built on that, the way a person builds on the only solid ground available to them, carefully, deliberately, one thing at a time. She had studied when studying was hard. She had applied for scholarships that people told her were beyond her reach and earned them anyway. She had graduated from nursing school with honors and chosen a career in which she could spend every working day doing for others the specific thing that had once been done for her, seeing people clearly at the moments when the world was looking away, being present with a quality of attention that has weight to it, that cannot be manufactured, that comes only from knowing what it means to need it. She had kept the necklace through every year of it, through every hard winter, and unexpected grace, and moment of doubt, and moment of triumph. She had worn it until it was smooth. She had never once considered leaving it behind. By the time she finished speaking, the room had gone to evening, the lights soft and fading, and Daniel sat with what he had heard settling into him the way rain settles into dry earth, slowly, thoroughly, reaching places that had been waiting without knowing they were waiting. He was an ordinary man who had done ordinary things in an ordinary afternoon of his youth and then moved away and lived his decades and forgotten entirely. And sitting before him was the evidence that those ordinary things had been, for another human being, the hinge upon which an entire life had turned. He thought about all the years between that October afternoon and this hospital room. He thought about everything she had built and everything she had endured, and the necklace worn smooth at the center of all of it. He could not speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice came out lower than he intended. "I had no idea," he said. She reached out and put her hand briefly over his. "That's the thing about kindness," she said quietly. "The person who offers it almost never does." The setback came 6 weeks into his recovery. An infection that undid weeks of careful progress and sent him back to bed and brought the fear back with it. The specific fear of a man who has seen clearly for the first time how quickly everything ordinary and beloved can be taken, and who now understands in his body what he had only understood abstractly before. One gray afternoon, he sat by the window watching rain collect in the parking lot below and felt hopelessness settle over him with a weight he could not push through. He sat with it. He let himself feel it, sat with it. He let himself feel it, and then Emma was there. Not with reassurance, not with the cheerful professional optimism that would have felt like an insult, but sitting beside him in the gray light, quiet for a long moment, and then saying softly that she remembered something he had told a 14-year-old girl, crying on cold concrete, that you do not have to see the whole staircase, you only have to find the next step, and that the next step is always enough. Daniel looked at his own words returning to him across 35 years. He felt something shift in his chest, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the slow, irresistible movement of something that has decided to change. He turned back to the window. He squared his shoulders. The next morning, he got up and did the work again. The morning they discharged him arrived on a Tuesday in early April, when the sky over Millhaven had that particular quality of blue that only exists in spring, clean and enormous, and full of a promise the season actually intends to keep. He packed his few belongings slowly and waited for Emma, and when she appeared in the doorway in her scrubs with the silver necklace at her collarbone, catching the morning light, neither of them immediately found words, which was right, which was the only honest response to a moment this full. He thanked her for everything, for her care and her patience, and for holding his history for him when he could not hold it himself. She pressed a small envelope in his hands. Inside was a photograph, old and faded at the edges, taken at a school event more than 30 decades ago. A teenage boy standing beside a shy young girl, both of them squinting slightly at whoever held the camera, both of them smiling in the careful way of people who are just beginning to understand that they might mean something to each other. Daniel held it for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were full. Emma's voice was steady, but only just. "You saved me twice," she said. Once when I was 14, when you sat down beside me and made me feel like I was worth sitting beside. She paused and her hand went briefly to the necklace. And once when you came back and reminded me that everything I built my whole life on was real. Daniel pressed the photograph to his chest and said nothing, because there was nothing that would not have been smaller than the moment deserved. You went home. Life returned to its shape, slowly and then more confidently, the way a river returns to its banks after a flood. But Daniel Brooks was not the man who had driven beneath that bright sky, tapping his fingers on a steering wheel. He began spending his evenings with a youth mentorship program in Millhaven, sitting with young people who were struggling in the specific ways that young people struggle when the world has not yet been kind enough to them. He listened far more than he spoke. He showed up every week without exception. He brought sandwiches sometimes, without making anything of it, because he understood now, in a way that went past intellect and into the bone, that the smallest gestures are often the ones that travel farthest through time. That what feels like nothing to the person offering it can become everything to the person receiving it, can become the foundation of a career and the life and the self that would not otherwise have existed. He thought about Emma's necklace, worn smooth by 35 years of faithful keeping, and he understood that kindness is not a small thing wearing the costume of a small thing. It is a very large thing that has learned to move quietly through the world so as not to frighten anyone. Years passed with the gentleness that years sometimes allow. Daniel and Emma remained close in the way that people remain close when they have shared something that cannot be adequately explained to anyone who was not there. They met for coffee on Saturday mornings at a small place on Millhaven's Main Street, where the owner knew their orders and the corner table by the window was usually free. They talked easily, they laughed often, and every now and then one of them would look at the other across the table and say with a smile that had 35 years of living inside it, "Do you remember me?" And the other would say, "Should I?" And the question that had once meant loss and confusion and the grief of forgotten connection now meant something else entirely. It meant, "I found you." It meant you were worth finding. It meant that kindness sent out into the world does not vanish when the moment passes, but travels forward through time in ways we cannot see or measure or predict, moving through lives and years and the hearts of people we helped without remembering, returning to us when we need it most in forms we never could have anticipated, wearing a name badge and carrying tea made exactly the way we like it, and touching with one quiet hand a silver necklace worn smooth by the most faithful kind of love there is. The love that remembers when everything else forgets. The love that holds on. The love that waits. If this story reached something inside you, if it reminded you that the kindness you offered long ago is still out there somewhere moving through the world on your behalf, please subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories right now. Every single week, we bring you stories of quiet heroes and ordinary people who change lives without ever knowing it. Stories of loyalty and grace and the extraordinary power of simply choosing to see another person. Click subscribe below and ring that notification bell so these stories find you every time. And please, leave us a comment telling us about a moment of kindness you have never forgotten. Someone who sat beside you when the world walked past. Someone who came back. Your story belongs here, and every voice in this community is heard with exactly the care it deserves.